Good evening and welcome to Addressing the Issues with me, Andy Streisfeld. Today's a bit of a relaxed day today. I'm not wearing a tie. I wanted to try to enjoy the topic matter with our friend and our former guest, Alistair Edgar. But before I bring him on, I just wanted to address a couple of issues that we've been receiving in mails. And thank you. I've been waiting for the emails to come in. The focal point of addressing the issue is initially to address any type of topic matter that comes across that the viewership would like to watch. We're not just a political awareness show. We want to try to tackle every issue that's there that people want to have some more education. As we started this show back in 2023, we tackled the idea of the Canadian identity. And the story doesn't stop. We keep having these conversations, and fans have been wanting to learn more and more about the challenges as we head towards potential elections. And we wanted to try to address the issues that are germane. And I'm not here to talk about politics. One of the things I've said constantly during the show is we do not invite politicians on this show, and I never will. Either present or past, that has been something of a debate because I only bring people here to address the issue that needs to be addressed. So in the case of when we talked about the Prime Minister's house, or when we talk about governance, or when we talk about the world events, we try to bring people who understand the know, who are able to give you the insights so we can address the issue. And then eventually, if we're talking elections, hopefully you'll address the issue by your vote. And that was one of our first shows, was about apathy. Speaking about politics and recognizing where we are, I am not a political I do not lean for any political party whatsoever. I'm a patriot in this country and I love the country that I live in. However, this week we did lose a prime minister of note, Brian Mulroney. So just wanted to acknowledge that for those of you out there and if you wish to have conversations about the past, feel free to send in topic matter and we can discuss it. But in the meantime, we're going back into the idea of Canadian identity, and we're here with our friend Alistair Edgar, Associate Dean over at the Balsillie School of Governance. Balsillie School of Governance. And we are going to discuss today our relationship with the world when it comes to international agreements. You've been noticing lately in sound bites from political parties all over the place of how we're not meeting our targets. We're not doing our job or our responsibility in the world. And that was something that I wanted to address because I think Canada has, since World War II and prior to that, has pretty much addressed every international concern and has tried to do it in the best that it can with the size of population and with the actual clout that we have, both financially or technologically. So with us, Alistair, welcome on the show back again. It's good to see you.
Good to see you, Andy, and thanks for the invite.
Oh, you're very welcome. So I'm going to jump right in. We're going to talk about our role on the international stage. A lot of people like NATO or political parties from wherever state that we're not meeting our goals, we're not meeting our numbers. Now, personally, I feel in a country where we have poverty and where we have homelessness and we have issues, should we be spending money on defense? That's another story for us to discuss here. So when the world is making commitments and Canada is being asked to commit, and they're being criticized sometimes by their allies and sometimes by their enemies of not doing their job, what do we have to say about this?
Sure. Well, I mean, let's ground it on the NATO piece because people have probably seen or heard, that discussion about Canada not meeting its 2% GDP target, and sometimes plain critiques of that by our allies, particularly the United States. Number of things to say. Of course, they're talking now, well, when Sweden joins NATO this month, I believe it is, there'll be 32 countries in NATO. Most of the countries by this year either will have met or are on a path to meet the 2% spending on defense. Canada right now will be one of the few that doesn't. We certainly have, because you mentioned, Andy, we've got domestic priorities. We've got, homelessness. We've got high costs of housing, living inflation, food prices. We have to remember we're also not alone in that. All those other countries face the same thing. It's not that we're the only country that has those kinds of problems. They face the same economic challenges, financial challenges, but they are making their commitments. So I'm in a sense of two minds. When I hear too much criticism of Canada on its defense spending, I have to remind the critics that Canada is the 7th largest spender on defense in NATO. which is different from what it spends GDP. We're only at about 1.3% GDP, but some of the countries that are meeting their more than 2% are contributing in absolute terms very little, because their economies are tiny. So we are a significant contributor to NATO. We're also contributing to NATO on two fronts, because we have the European front, where we have forces in Latvia, and we also, of course, have North America and NORAD. And we just made a commitment recently to a $40 billion upgrade program for NORAD. So we're spread geographically. We're a significant contributor, but we're not meeting the 2% target. And if countries take that as a political signal, then that's what they're going to be focused on, the 2% target.
So last week we had Anne Fitz-Gerald from your school, and we talked about Canada's legacy in the world, and where I did not know this at one point, when we were being criticized of not being, active members on international missions or on NATO. Anne was explaining to us how Canada has a specialty. And I don't want to go to Marxist theory, but I think if I remember my political science class at university, it was the common tenet of that was to each of his own ability for the state. So in this case here, we found out that Canada had the most successful snipers in the world, and they were being loaned out on missions, and many times they actually had the world records ahead of any American or British or NATO member. So could we say that we're not discounting our responsibility, but we are providing like more value in other aspects of international agreements, like with NATO, and saying, okay, we're providing you, the snipers, you're welcome. We're providing you cyber security, you're welcome, type of thing. Or is there really, or are we really not doing what we're supposed to do? And should we change the narrative?
Yeah. I would say we're not really doing what we can do. There's a number of things. We were, Andy, you and I are of at least a certain age, and usually when I ask people of a certain age, how involved is Canada in peacekeeping, they will say, well, we're a world-leading peacekeeper. Well, we're not, and we haven't been for 20 years, and we no longer participate in most peacekeeping. What we do, coming to that niche idea, we will supply a logistics officer, because we have very good logistics training. But when the leading peacekeeping troop contributors whose forces are dying in peacekeeping missions are, Bangladesh, Nepal, Nigeria, Pakistan, India, who are putting in hundreds or thousands of peacekeepers, and we're putting in literally a dozen, and they're all logistics people. It's really difficult for them to swallow that we're providing niche capabilities. We may be able to, but it's decreasing in how many niches we can provide, and we are stepping back from a lot of them. And frankly, in some, we're no longer considered trustworthy, in a sense. The Australia, UK, US AUKUS group out of the Five Eyes, the Five Eyes being the intelligence sharing, which includes those three, plus Canada and New Zealand. We've been cut out of that as it's gone to AUKUS, because we're not seen as having assets. We don't have the military capabilities to do things that those three countries value. And so conversations are starting to happen around and away from us. And last one I'll mention for now, if we want to, there are plenty of people who criticize the UN, but we have now, the last two times that we sought a seat on the UN Security Council, we've been defeated. The previous time, the first time we lost under Stephen Harper, the second time we lost under Justin Trudeau. And I think to some extent, those defeats also should give us a sense of how other countries in the world perceive us. We're not seen as leaders.
Let's come back to that, Elster, in just a second. We're going to be back with Professor Elster Edgar in just a moment here on addressing the issues. All right, welcome back to Addressing the Issues. And we're here with our guest, Alistair Edgar. So you invoked two prime ministers, and I want to move us now in a slightly different direction, but it's germane to what we're talking about. So I'm noticing, and maybe we can have this discussion and see, that our foibles as a country is being weaponized politically. So meaning, when we talk about supporting Ukraine, everybody from both sides of the hall, for every party from the Bloc to the Green to anybody in between, was in support of it. We all recognize it. Our citizenry goes with Ukrainian flags in their front lawn next to their Canadian flags. We took on the role and responsibility of being a big brother to this fallen country. I know that here in Brantford, I was involved with some local resolutions and stuff in support of supporting the Ukraine. Now, I noticed that since it's been now year two, I think we're heading into this situation, I find that this has become now a political hot potato, where now a certain political party and another political party are using it as weapons of justification. But at the end of the day, an international agreement, an international commitment, be it NATO or Interpol or any type of other subject matter that is germane to an international cooperation aspect. Should that be a no-go zone? Like, should we leave that out of our political lexicon and leave that out of the weaponizing of politics to make a group or an organization feel inadequate or put it out there that we're not doing enough because that person is leading the government or that person is in opposition?
I guess I'm a typical academic, Andy. It depends on who's doing the weaponizing. The only reason I say that, there certainly has been for the last several years, it's not this year alone, increasing election interference, increasing misinformation, disinformation, and what I call malinformation. I mean, misinformation, people are just getting stuff wrong. Disinformation, they're just giving you the wrong stuff. Malinformation, they're giving you the wrong stuff because they want to cause harm, right? So, we've seen plenty of discussions about Russian election interference in the United States, or more recently, China's accusations of Chinese election interference in Canada. So there's that kind of weaponization of policy into the Canadian milieu to try to divide, whether it's Canada, the United States, any other country. I think that's something that we all need to be very careful about. Whose information are we, if we're going to parrot some information, whose information are we parroting, or on whose information are we relying for our opinions? Domestically, I think, political party, we have freedom of speech, freedom of thought. Political parties should do what they want to do, except that I think one can go too far where playing politics domestically with foreign policy starts to cause domestically induced harm to your policy coherence. And I think we've lost bipartisanship in our foreign policy. To the extent, it's not that we unnecessarily disagree about foreign policy per se, but we're starting to play games with foreign policy. And I think that is a difficult situation that I think I've seen play out initially over Chinese weather balloons and Chinese election interference, and how that's been played out in the House, over to more recently the accusations of Indian government or government officials supported plots of assassination against Canadian citizens, where we've seen how some of that kind of politicking for domestic political benefit creates problems in our foreign policy.
So I remember when you were here last year on the show, we talked about an example that I gave when I was growing up in Montreal. My parents are ethnic Romanians, and we knew that there was Romanian secret police, Securitate, infiltrating into the culture, and infiltrating not only in the culture, but into the local politics and sleepers and all that stuff. Yep. And it wasn't strange to have Ukrainian, secret police, Polish secret police during the times of solidarity and all that other stuff. And young people in Canada, young Ukrainians, young Poles, being very brave and saying, I'm risking my life because, I'm on a blacklist in that country for being a rebel here, spreading the message, and protesting and all that stuff. So, and I think you and I were talking about this because I think at the end of the day, the issue here is that being a G7 country, being a democratic country, a champion of peacekeeping and peacemaking, do we just, for the sake of the international agreement, in order for us to be an active player, do we just let it go? We're not here to roust it up and round up all these evil spies because we know that, and we're going to be the conduit. If we use the idea of international conflicts, there's always that one country that is the conduit for both sides. In the case of the Middle East, which I didn't want to broach today, but the Norwegians played a very big role in the Oslo Accords because they ended up being the broker there. So are we playing the role of international agreements properly? And we're saying, okay, we know you're here. We know you're trying to do stuff in our country. We'll keep an eye on you to the point where you're detrimental and you're not going to blow up a nuclear reactor or anything. But in the meantime, we're going to let you do it because we have our operatives in your countries acting on your benefit and your enemy's benefit to try to bring a lasting peace or at least a semblance of peace. Or am I wrong in that assessment?
I think in the case of Canada, at least, being able to play a role in a sense as a conduit or as a broker, we used to say Canada is a middle power. It was a middle power in terms of how powerful it was, its military capabilities, etc., but also a middle power between the United States and Britain or Europe, and a middle power between Western interests and the global South, as we now call the global South. And we had, again, it's a tired word, we had the credibility to be able to play those roles. I'm not sure that we any longer have that kind of credibility with those other countries to be able to do that. And I'm not sure that they're very interested in us doing that. I mean, India now talks about, and other countries like Chile talk about pursuing a policy of active non-alignment, where they seek to be those kind of brokers, if you will. And India, that's an ally of the United States, is also the second largest purchaser of oil from Russia. So, it's financing Russia. Or Turkey, that is a member of NATO, but was able at one point, along with the Secretary General of the UN, to broker the grain deal to get Ukrainian grain out, and broker that between Ukraine and Russia, as well as the United States. I don't think Canada is in that position anymore. And again, one of the problems I see to some extent there, talking about furtive agents walking around in Canada doing things. It's my dog's barking upstairs, if you can hear that. It was interesting, not in a great way, to watch when the rumors or reports, not rumors, when information was leaked, when reports came out about Chinese efforts to engage in election interference. That was understandably a big issue. That became a political issue. And Prime Minister Trudeau and his government were criticized for not responding or not reporting on that. And then fast forward, to the last 6 months, when Mr. Trudeau stands up in Parliament and says, I've got credible evidence that India or an agent of the Indian government colluded to support an assassination of a Sikh activist, but a Canadian citizen. And that, I think, probably he got up to say that because he didn't want to be facing another leak and another criticism. But his reporting on that blew up our relationship with India. But what I mean there is the capacity to keep a lid on things, the capacity, and we had, by all accounts, reached out numerous times over the previous months to the Indian government to say, look, we have evidence of this, and they just ignored us. So they weren't interested in what we had to say. But you have the Canadian government not able or not willing to try to keep that down and continue with quiet diplomacy, because eventually it would come up in the House and be used as a political tool. That's where I think some of that loss of bipartisanship becomes a problem, rather than all the parties being able to talk quietly to say, we know this stuff is bad, we know it's going on, what do we need to do with it in Canada's interests?
All right, Alistair, we're going to take a break. We're going to come right back, and we're just going to conclude with something you just broached, and I'll give you more time to expand on that. So stay tuned with us. We'll be right back on addressing the issues. Welcome back to Addressing the Issue with our friend and former guest, Alistair Edgar. Okay, so we won't have enough time to unpack this, so I really want to bring you back for another episode. But in the meantime, let's just take a moment to understand the crux of what we're saying here. So would you say that election year is coming, whatever it is, and we somehow learn to play nice with each other, and we agree that it is in the best national interest in the world as it's changing to work together rather than work against each other. Do you think, within the next 30 seconds to a minute, do you think that it is an attainable goal, or is this just, it's the sign of the times, it'll never happen?
I think in Canada it is an attainable goal. I think to our neighbor in the south it is not an attainable goal.
All right. We're going to come back. First of all, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I really want to invite you, if you could stay, or we could probably coax you to come back. I really would like to tackle the issue that you mentioned on international cooperation and multiculturalism, because I think that's germane to the future of Canada and how it's going to work with us, considering what's happening in the world today. So in the meantime, on behalf of all of us here at Addressing the Issue, I want to thank you very much for tuning in. Again, please continue to email, send messages to us on our social media, or just call into and just let us know how we're doing and topics that you want us to address. Until then, on behalf of myself and the team, we wish you a very nice evening and stay safe.